On my 29th birthday, in a polished steakhouse my parents loved to show off, my grandmother raised a glass and casually mentioned the house fund I'd supposedly been spending for years. My name is Lily Wright, and in that moment, every sacrifice I'd made to survive on my own turned into a question if I was always broke and independent, who was living on the future meant for me. This is the night their perfect family image shattered, and I had to decide whether to stay silent or burn the lie down. If you want to hear how it ends, stay with me. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Hello, I'm Lily Wright, and my 29th birthday was the night my parents' story about our family finally broke in public. They call it a peaceful celebration. I call it the moment I got ambushed over a steak I couldn't afford. The steakhouse they chose has leather booths and low lighting, the kind of place where waiters glide and use Mr. and Mrs. like titles. In our mid-sized town, Tom and Diane Wright are important. My dad is running for city council. My mom runs the Wright Family Community Center and chairs so many fundraisers people joke she lives in evening gowns. Neighbors say they sacrificed everything for their girls. No one asks which girl paid the price. I work hospital admin days and freelance web designer nights. 2 jobs, 1 small apartment, a car that shakes when I turn the key. I said no to overtime for this dinner. Now I sit across from my parents in a clearance rack dress while they smile like invisible cameras are rolling. My dad studies the wine list as if policy is hidden between vintages. My mom straightens the knives so they line up with the table's edge as if crooked silverware could threaten the image they've built. Next to her sits my younger sister, Grace. Second-year law student, full scholarship internships lined up. Grace doesn't have to brag. My parents do it for her. My advisor said my brief was the best in the class, she says, cutting into her steak. He thinks I could clerk for a federal judge. My mom glows. Of course he does, sweetheart. You've always been our star. My dad adds, all your hard work is paying off. We're so proud. I sip water. No one asks about my hard work. About the nights I fall asleep over my laptop finishing client projects so I can keep up with rent and old medical bills. Last week I launched a website for a local nonprofit that doubled their donations. On the drive here, I mentioned it. My mother smiled at her reflection in the visor mirror and said, "That's nice, dear," then went back to quizzing Grace on contracts. In their version of our family, I'm background, the independent one. That's the word they cling to. Lily's always been so independent, my mom tells anyone who'll listen. She never needed much from us. She says it like I chose that role. Like independence is a personality quirk, not the sentence they handed me when they decided their attention belonged to Grace and to the people who clap for them. At the head of the table sits the one person who doesn't seem to be performing, my grandmother, Evelyn Cole. Silver hair, pinned, neat posture, straight eyes sharp. She watches more than she talks. She used to slip me $20 for gas texted when I was in the ER alone, saying, "Call me if you need anything." I never did. When your parents praise you for never needing help, you start to believe needing anything at all is a flaw. Our appetizer plates are cleared. The waiter tops off drinks and disappears. My dad inhales like he's about to launch a campaign story. Before he can, Grandma lifts her wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she says. Her voice is calm, but it cuts through the chatter. Even Grace falls silent. Everyone turns toward her. She looks right at me. "To Lily," she says. "To my granddaughter who works harder than anyone should have to and keeps going even when life has been unfair. You've had to be independent in ways you never should have, and I want you to know I see that. I see you." Heat rises up my neck. For once, I don't feel like scenery. I manage a small smile. "Thanks, Grandma." My parents nod along, smiling like this is a sweet moment that fits their brand of loving family. But Evelyn doesn't sit down. She keeps her glass raised, eyes still on me. And she adds lightly to Lily finally using that house fund we set up for her. "I hope the bank didn't give you any trouble when you took out the first 50,000. The words hit like a slap. House fund. 50,000. For a second, I'm sure I misheard. I live in a one-bedroom with peeling paint and a fridge that grinds in its sleep. I ration gas at the end of the month. There is no house fund in my life. Across the table, my dad's hand jerks. His wine glass clinks hard against his plate. My mother's smile freezes, then reforms thinner. Grace stops with her fork halfway to her mouth. "What a funny way to say it, Mom," my mother says too quickly. "You know how complicated the bank paperwork is?" What house fund? My voice shouldn't carry, but at our table the sound of it seems to swallow everything else. My father's color drains. Grace drags her eyes from me to them, realization dawning. My mother's gaze snaps to mine, and there it is again. The silent command I've felt my whole life: don't make a scene. Don't threaten the picture. Grandma slowly lowers her glass. Lines deepen around her mouth. "The house fund," she repeats. "The one we started when you were born." "Tom, Diane, you told me you'd explained it all to her years ago." She turns to my parents, and the air at the table goes heavy. For the first time tonight, they don't look polished. They look trapped. My father opens his mouth, then closes it. My mother's fingers crush her napkin. "Evelyn," she says tightly, "this really isn't the time, but it's already too late." Something has cracked open in front of us. My hands shake around my glass. My heart hammers so hard I feel it in my throat. For years, my parents have acted like they could erase me whenever it made their lives easier. Now, with one simple toast, my grandmother has dragged a buried word into the light fund attached to my name, and a number so big it makes my head spin. I don't know the details yet. I just know the truth is sitting between my grandmother's confusion and my parents' fear, and whatever it is, it's about to change what family means to me forever. 2 nights before, my grandmother said house fund, like it was a normal part of my life. I was hunched over my laptop in our dim apartment, trying not to sink. It was 2:23 a.m. The nonprofit site I was coding crawled toward completion, while a stack of medical bills glared from the corner of my desk. If the client paid on time, I could cover rent and one minimum payment. If he didn't, I'd be choosing which bill got to threaten me next. "You're kidding," Maya said, shuffling out in an old t-shirt. She saw the clock, the screen, my face. "You went to the ER 2 months ago for stress, and you're right back here. Your parents are out there cutting ribbons, and you're sacrificing your health for $300. Rent doesn't care about my blood pressure," I said. "Anyway, I'm the independent one, remember?" The word tasted bitter. "Independent is something you choose," she said, "not something your family uses to erase you." She set a glass of water down and went back to bed. I stared at the cursor blinking, and my mind slipped to the first time independence felt like a threat instead of a compliment. 2 years ago, driving home from a job interview in my 15-year-old sedan, November rain coming down in sheets. One moment the engine hummed, the next it coughed and died. The dash went black. I coasted in the dark as trucks roared past, spraying water over my useless windshield, praying my car reached the shoulder before someone slammed into me. When I stopped, my hands were shaking. My phone was at 8%. My checking account was under 100. No roadside plan, no savings, just the one thing you're supposed to have: parents. My mother answered over the sound of a TV. "My car just died on the highway," I said. "I'm on the shoulder. I don't have money for a tow. Can you call someone and put it on your card? I'll pay you back as soon as my check hits. I just need help." There was a long pause, then the familiar sigh. "Lily, you're an adult. We can't rescue you every time something happens. You chose this unstable computer work. If you had a real job like Grace is working toward, you'd have savings. It wouldn't be fair to your sister if we kept bailing you out." "This is the first time I've ever asked," I whispered. A semi roared by, rocking the car. "I'm scared." "You're independent," she said. "Figure it out." Then she hung up. That was the whole safety net, 3 sentences in a dial tone. I used the last of my battery to call a tow company, willing to take a nearly maxed-out card over the phone. The bill clung to me for a year. 2 weeks later, I pulled into my parents' driveway and saw a brand new white SUV parked out front, bow still tied to the hood. Inside, my mom handed Grace the keys. "We just want you safe driving to campus," she said. "You can't put a price on your children's future." I stood at the window and realized they already had. That wasn't the only time the family's needs came first, and mine were erased. A year later, an email popped up. "You've been accepted." It was an intensive design and coding boot camp in the city, 6 months, $8,000, 90% job placement at companies I'd only read about. It looked like a door out of survival mode. I printed the curriculum, the stats, and drove to my parents' house with a neat little folder. "I'm not asking for all of it," I said, sitting on their unused formal couch. "If you can help with the $2,000 deposit, I can get a small loan for the rest. This matches the freelance work I already do. It would get me a real developer job. Benefits, stability." My dad stared at a spot on the wall. My mom leafed through my pages as if they were junk mail. "8,000 is a lot of money," she said. "Your father's campaign has already required huge sacrifices. We have to protect the family's security. We can't risk that on something that might not pan out." "It's not a whim," I said. "It's my field." She smiled that thin, polite smile. "You chose a riskier path than Grace." "That's fine, but we can't underwrite every idea you bring us. We've sacrificed so much already, Lily. We have to think of the whole family." I missed the deposit deadline. The spot went to someone else. A week later, photos from a charity gala popped up on my feed, my parents in formal wear under the Wright Family Community Center banner holding an oversized check. The caption read, "We sacrificed so others don't have to." The comments called them inspiring. I stared at that line, wondering when exactly they decided I was part of the cost. Those nights, those conversations are the quiet background to everything I do now. When I skip appointments because of co-pays, when I take on one more freelance job instead of resting, I tell myself I'm being independent. What I really mean is I know no one is coming. So at the steakhouse, when my grandmother lifts her glass and says she hopes the house fund has made my life easier, my first instinct is to think I misheard. Then she says 50,000 and my mind can't force that number into any version of my life. My throat is dry but my voice comes out clear. "I never got any house fund," I say louder than I intended. "I've never seen a dollar of it." Forks freeze. Grandma's smile collapses. My dad tightens his grip on his napkin until his knuckles go white. My mother gives a sharp, brittle laugh. "Lily, you're misremembering," she says. "We've talked about this. You always get so dramatic." "No," I say. "We haven't." Grace looks from me to them, confusion sharpening into something else. My grandmother sets her glass down with a soft, decisive clink. "That isn't possible," she says quietly. "I wired the first 100,000 when you turned 18. Tom, you signed the trustee papers. You promised me she knew the money was for her future. 100,000. The number roars in my ears. My father opens his mouth, closes it. My mother's eyes flash, then harden. "Evelyn, this isn't the time or place," she snaps. "We'll clear it up later." My grandmother doesn't look away. "The time to clear it up was when you took it," she says. Her voice is calm, but the words land like a slap. The story my parents tell about our family hangs in the air between us, suddenly flimsy. For once, I'm not the only one who sees the holes. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice a man in a dark suit stand up from a small table by the wall. He picks up a worn leather folder, straightens his tie, and starts walking toward us, like this is exactly why he came. The man in the dark suit walks straight to our table like he's been waiting for this cue. He's older than my parents, late 50s maybe, with careful movements, and a face that says he's seen too many people lie to him. He carries a worn leather folder like it's heavier than it looks. "Evelyn," he says quietly, nodding to my grandmother. "Tom. Diane." My mother stiffens. "Henry, what are you doing here?" My grandmother doesn't answer her. "Lily," she says instead. "This is Henry Cole. He's managed my accounts for 30 years. Henry sets the folder down beside my bread plate, the leather thudding softly against the linen. I thought this was going to be a private family dinner, he says, eyes flicking from my parents to me. But given what I just heard, I'd say we're past the point of keeping things private. My father forces a smile. There's been a misunderstanding, he starts. We don't need to drag business into a birthday. Henry ignores him and flips the folder open. Inside are copies of documents neat and official, my name printed again and again in crisp black ink. I catch the heading on the first page, the Lily Wright Trust. My stomach lurches. He turns the page so it faces me. This, he says, is the trust your grandparents set up when you were born. You are listed as the sole beneficiary. Your parents are the trustees. His fingertip taps their signatures at the bottom. My father's name. My mother's name. Their handwriting familiar from permission slips and school forms now binding them to something I never knew existed. My mother laughs, but there's no humor in it. Oh, Henry, those are ancient. The structure's changed a dozen times for tax purposes. Lily has trouble remembering details. We've talked about this fund with her before. No, I say the words scraping out of my throat. You haven't. She cuts me a sharp look, the one that used to shut me down before I even finished a sentence. Lily, this is not the time to make a scene. You're confused. Henry doesn't sit. I updated these myself 2 years ago, he says. Evelyn asked me to confirm that everything was still correctly in Lily's name. When I requested a status report from the bank last month, the responses raised questions. My grandmother's jaw tightens. Questions like, why my granddaughter was still living paycheck to paycheck when the trust should have given her a cushion, she says, or why she never mentioned the house fund I was assured she knew about. My father's voice is tight. We explained to you, Evelyn, that we were managing the resources for the whole family. Consolidating. It's all very complicated. It's not that complicated, Henry says mildly. This account has a single beneficiary. Her. His eyes meet mine. Did anyone ever tell you that the money your grandparents set aside was specifically for your future? Every time I begged for help and was told there was nothing extra, every time I worked until my vision blurred while my parents posted pictures at fundraisers, every time they called me independent, like it was praise instead of a way to erase me. Those memories close in one on top of another until I can barely breathe. No, I say. The word shakes, but it comes. They didn't tell me anything. My mother's voice sharpens. Lily, we are not doing this here. You know we've always put the family first. We used what we had to build security, to build the community center, to support Grace through law school. You didn't want college. You chose your own path. We've sacrificed everything for this family. The word hits me differently now. Sacrificed. For years I believed I was the problem child they rose above, the one who needed less. Now looking at that folder, I see it clearly. I wasn't the one they sacrificed for. I was the one they sacrificed. My dad jumps in, his tone, soothing, practiced. Sweetheart, maybe you forgot. We talked about the fund being for everyone. Remember? We agreed it made more sense that way. You've always been so easygoing about money. I stare at him. Easygoing. That's one way to describe crying over bills in secret, so they wouldn't think I'd failed. Don't lie to her, my grandmother snaps. She pushes back her chair. For a moment, I see the woman who left a small town with 2 kids, and no support, and built her own life. You told me the account was secure. You told me she understood. I warned you, Tom. If you mishandled that money, you'd regret it. My father's mask slips. Evelyn, lower your voice, he says. You're overreacting. My campaign. Your campaign can sink, she cuts in. If you stole from my granddaughter to pay for your billboards, you can explain that to the voters. The restaurant hums around us, oblivious, but at our table the air is thick buzzing. My parents look less like community heroes and more like people who just realized the ground under them might not be theirs. My chest tightens. The room shrinks. I think about the night my car died on the highway and my mother told me to figure it out alone. The way they told me they couldn't spare a cent for a class that could have changed my life, then wrote checks with my last name in big letters for strangers. They didn't just take money. They took choices, time, years of my life. Every no they gave me suddenly has a dollar sign attached. My vision tunnels. The leather of the booth digs into my side. I feel ambushed in the middle of my own birthday. My entire history with my parents rewritten in real time, and all they care about is keeping the performance going. We will discuss this later, my mother says between her teeth. Sit down, Lily. You're embarrassing the family. Something in me breaks. For 29 years, that sentence has been enough to shut me up. Don't embarrass the family. Don't threaten what we've built. Don't make us look bad after we sacrificed so much. But right now, with proof of what they did sitting inches from my hand, I realize the truth: they did that on their own. No, I say. My voice is surprisingly calm. You already did that without my help. I push back my chair. It scrapes loudly across the floor, heads turning. My father reaches out like he might grab my arm. He doesn't. My mother hisses my name like a warning. Grace just stares wide-eyed as if someone scrambled her whole childhood in front of her. I step away from the table, away from the smiling photos on the walls, away from the carefully curated idea of who we are. I walk straight out of the private dining room through the main restaurant, past couples clinking glasses and kids sharing dessert. No one stops me. Outside, the night is colder than I expected. I lean against the brick facade and gulp air like I've been underwater. My phone buzzes before I can even catch my breath. Mom, come back. We can explain. Another buzz. Dad, don't blow this out of proportion. You're overreacting. Another. Mom, again. You are threatening everything we've worked for. Is that what you want? They still don't say my name without overreacting. Attached. They still talk about their work, their legacy, their image. I stare at the screen, fingers trembling, then swipe their messages away and scroll to the one number that's never made me feel small. How was the birthday circus? Maya answers on the first ring. I open my mouth and nothing comes out, just my breathing ragged. Lily, she says, voice sharpening. What happened? They took something from me, I manage. Something big. Grandma found out. It blew up. Okay, she says. No panic, just resolve. Come home. We'll sort it out here, not in their theater. I nod, even though she can't see me, and hang up. My fingers shake as I dig my keys from my bag and cross the lot to my dented car. The engine coughs before it turns over like it's as tired as I am. As I pull my seatbelt across my chest, my phone buzzes again. I almost ignore it, expecting another guilt-laced text from my parents. But the number is unknown. Lily, this is Henry Cole. If you want the truth about what your parents did, be at my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. The message sits on the screen, simple and devastating. Truth. Parents. Did. Words that have never belonged in the same sentence. The engine idles, vibrating under my hands. In the rearview mirror, the restaurant glows warm and golden, the picture of a peaceful family night. Inside, my parents are already spinning a new story about me, I'm sure of it. Dramatic, ungrateful, unbalanced. But Henry's text is a crack in their version of reality. A door they forgot to bolt. I stare at the message until the screen goes dark, then tap it awake again, just to be sure I didn't imagine it. For the first time, I feel something other than fear under the shock, something small and sharp and bright. They tried to erase me from my own future. Tomorrow, I'm going to find out exactly how. Henry's office is in one of those glass towers downtown that I usually just drive past and assume I'll never have a reason to enter. At 8:58 a.m., I stand in the lobby feeling like an imposter in my thrift store blazer and scuffed flats, while people in pressed suits swipe badges and glide into elevators. A receptionist directs me to the top floor. The ride up feels like being pulled away from the life I know and into something I can't undo. Henry's waiting when the doors open, jacket off, sleeves rolled. His office smells like coffee and paper. Floor-to-ceiling windows show the city spread out under a pale sky, but my eyes go straight to the conference table. My grandmother sits at one end, hands folded, face set. Next to her is a woman I've never seen before, mid-30s. Dark hair in a low bun, a slim laptop open in front of her. Lily Grandma says standing. This is Nadia Cho, an attorney I trust. She's here to represent you if you want her to. Represent me. The idea feels foreign. In my family, I'm the one who gets talked over, not the one who gets someone to speak for her. Nadia nods. I've reviewed some preliminary documents, she says. We can go through everything together and then talk about options. Options. Truth. Words I haven't associated with my parents in a long time. Henry closes the door and takes a thick stack of papers from a folder on the table. My name sits at the top of the first page, the Lily Wright Trust. This is everything we have from the last 10 years, he says. Earlier records will take a bit more digging, but the pattern is already clear. He slides the stack toward me. I lower myself into a chair and force my fingers to stop shaking long enough to turn the first page. Your grandparents funded this over time, he explains. Between Evelyn and your late grandfather, about $750,000 went into the account. The trust instrument states that when you turn 21, control would transfer to you. I look up. I'm 29. Right, he says softly. So that should have happened 8 years ago. He doesn't need to finish the sentence. It didn't. I scan down the columns. At first it's just numbers and dates, but then the labels sharpen into pictures of my life from a distance I never knew existed. A large withdrawal labeled Property Down Payment. A series of payments to Wright Mortgage LLC. That's the house, Henry says. Your parents' current home. More entries. Home renovation, kitchen and bath. Lake cabin deposit. Country club membership dues. The numbers line up with years I remember watching my parents' world expand while mine shrank. They told everyone they had sacrificed so much to build stability, as if that stability just materialized through their hard work and community spirit. I flip to another page. The labels change. Tuition payment. Grace Wright. Private university. Semester after semester, tens of thousands at a time. Then law school. Grace Wright. Off-campus housing. Grace. Vehicle purchase. Safety for campus commute. My grandmother inhales sharply. That would be the SUV, she murmurs. Your mother told me they'd saved for it. At the bottom of one page, a line item makes my stomach twist. Reallocation of Lily portion. Parental discretion. The amount is huge. Beside it is a note in cold, neat type: funds redirected per trustee decision to support family needs and educational priorities. Family needs, I repeat. Educational priorities. My throat burns. Meaning my parents decided their house and my sister's degrees were more important than my entire future. Nadia leans forward. In legal terms, she says this is misappropriation of funds by trustees. They had a fiduciary duty to manage the trust for your benefit. Using it for their own expenses or for a different beneficiary is a breach. Call it what it is, Grandma says, voice tight. They stole from you. I grip the edge of the table. When did you start suspecting, I ask her. You said last night you asked Henry to look into this. She looks smaller than I've ever seen her, but her eyes stay steady. When you mentioned the hospital bills, she says. We were having coffee after that ER visit. You laughed it off, said you'd be fine, that you were used to juggling payments. I asked if the trust wasn't covering emergencies. You just stared at me. That's when I realized you had no idea it existed. I remember that coffee. I thought she was making small talk. I called Diane. Grandma continues. She told me you didn't like to be controlled by money, that you refused to touch the fund, that you loved being independent. She said you insisted she focus on Grace and the community center, that you were fine. Her voice cracks on the last word. I wanted to believe her, Lily. She's my daughter. Fine. Independent. The story they told about me to justify draining an account with my name on it. I think about nights in my cramped apartment skipping medication because I couldn't afford the refill, telling myself I was strong, resilient, the kind of person who didn't need help. I was living out their lie, quietly carrying the cost so everyone else could admire their generosity. Nadia taps one page gently. They also routed a substantial amount through the Wright Family Community Center, she says. On paper, those are charitable contributions. In reality, they appear to be using your trust as a slush fund to build their public image. The board donors the town, they all believe they're giving their own money away. And my dad's campaigning on that image, I say. I can see the signs now, his face smiling beside slogans about integrity and family values. If this comes out, it won't just hit them, Henry says carefully. It will shake people who trusted them. Donors who thought they were partnering with a model family. Volunteers. Beneficiaries. It could rock this town for a while. For a second, I feel guilty, like I'm the one threatening something fragile. But then I remember the highway shoulder, the boot camp opportunity, the way my parents told me no, again and again, while these numbers tell me they had yes, sitting there in black ink. So what happens now, I ask. My voice sounds flat to my own ears. Nadia folds her hands. Legally, you have a few options, she says. You can file a civil suit against your parents as trustees. We could seek to recover as much of the misused funds as possible, potentially force the sale of certain assets. We can also request an accounting from the community center and see how far this goes. If we wanted to, we could refer this for criminal investigation. Theft, fraud, whatever fits. I swallow. Criminal. The word feels radioactive. Another option, she continues, is a private settlement. We confront them with the audit, negotiate repayment, restructure. The trust maybe require them to step down from certain roles in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. That keeps it out of court and out of the papers. Less public, less messy. But it also means they never really face what they did in the court of public opinion. So either I blow up their lives and probably half the town's illusions, I say, or I let them buy silence and keep telling everyone how much they've sacrificed. Nadia doesn't flinch. I can tell you what's possible, she says. I can't tell you what's right for you. There isn't one clean answer. Grandma reaches over, covers my hand with hers. If you go forward, she says quietly, they will turn on you. The family, some of the community. They will call you ungrateful. They will say you're trying to destroy everything they built. They might threaten to cut you off emotionally, though I'd say they did that a long time ago. You will be the story instead of what they did. I know she's right. I can already hear the whispers at church, see Aunt Monica's pursed lips, feel the weight of people deciding if they believe the polished couple who funded the playground or the daughter who makes websites in a rented apartment. For a moment, I imagine signing whatever papers Nadia puts in front of me, taking a quiet payout, letting the surface of this town stay smooth. I could claw back some money, maybe a little justice for myself, and no one would look at my parents differently. No one would look at me at all. Then I remember the note on that statement Lily portion reallocated like I'm an entry that can just be moved, erased, written over. I think about my parents deciding somewhere along the way that my future was negotiable as long as the family looked good from the outside. They already erased me once, I say. My voice is low and steady now, on paper, from my own future. If I sign something to hide this, I help them do it again. Nadia studies me for a long moment. So I'll ask you directly, she says. Do you want justice or do you want peace? The question hangs in the air. Justice sounds like fire and noise and fallout. Peace sounds like swallowing something poisonous and calling it medicine. I look out at the city, the streets where my parents' campaign posters grin from lawns, the community center they named after themselves with money that should have given me a chance at a different life. My chest tightens, but the answer is suddenly clear. What if I want both? I say. What if I want them held accountable without burning down the whole town with them? Nadia's mouth curls into the smallest hint of a smile. Then she says we get strategic. I don't decide to go to war with my parents in Henry's office. I decide sitting on a splintered bench behind my old high school, staring at the football field where I once watched other people's parents cheer like the world depended on it. The bleachers are empty now, the town quiet in that middle-of-the-day lull. The only other person out here is Mr. Alvarez, my old civics teacher nursing a coffee from the gas station. I texted him after leaving Henry's building, fingers moving before my brain caught up. Can I talk to you? It's about my family, and money, and the whole town. He wrote back one word, always. Now he sits beside me like no time has passed. Henry filled me in on the broad strokes, he says. Only what Evelyn gave him permission to share, nothing more. He looks at me. How are you holding up like I've been walking around with a blindfold for 29 years, and someone just ripped it off, I say. Everything I thought my parents sacrificed for everything they told me about being independent, it was all a cover. For theft. The word still feels strange in my mouth. Theft. I always thought of thieves as strangers in masks, not people who signed permission slips and packed lunches. Part of me wants to burn their lives down, I admit. Another part feels guilty even thinking it. If this goes public, it's not just them. It's the community center, the donors, the people who believed in them. He nods slowly. This town likes its heroes, he says. But heroes don't get a free pass to hurt the people closest to them. You know what I tell my students about accountability? I shake my head. Forgiveness without truth is just silence dressed up as virtue. The words land hard. You can't jump straight to forgiveness while pretending the damage didn't happen, he continues. That's not noble. It's just convenient. For them, not for you. I stare at the field. If I stand up, they're going to say I'm betraying the family. Standing up for yourself isn't betrayal, he says. It's refusing to let wrong go unchallenged. You've been the one sacrificing quietly so they could shine. Maybe it's time their story stops erasing you. I think about my grandmother's face at the restaurant, the way she looked at those statements. The way Nadia said justice and peace like they were separate worlds. If I do this, I say I want to do it in a way that doesn't torch people who had nothing to do with it. Then be precise, he says. Aim for behavior, not annihilation. Make them answer for what they did. Give other people the chance to choose what they do with the truth. He squeezes my shoulder. That's community, not this fake image they built. Real community can handle hard truths. When I walk back into Henry's office that afternoon, I know what I'm going to say. Nadia and my grandmother look up from a screen full of numbers. My heart is pounding, but my voice comes out steady. No NDAs, I say. No quiet settlements where they get to keep the story neat. If they want any kind of deal, it happens in the light, not in secret. Nadia nods slowly, as if she was hoping I'd say that. All right, she says. Then we go full forensic on the trust. Every year, every withdrawal. We follow any transfers into the community center's accounts. We build the strongest possible case. And then I ask. Then we demand a formal meeting, she says. Here's my proposal. We have them, Grace and their lawyer, meet us at the Wright Family Community Center boardroom. We present the findings. We put a settlement on the table. Repay as much as possible, surrender control of the remaining trust assets to you, step down from all leadership roles at the center, and any associated boards. In return, you agree not to file criminal charges, only civil, and only if they refuse. And if they don't sign, I say. Nadia's eyes sharpen. If they don't sign, we file suit, she says. And Evelyn talks to a reporter who's already sniffing around your father's campaign finances. Everett Lane from the Gazette. He's been trying to understand how your parents fund so many projects on a councilman's salary. This would answer some questions. Grandma's mouth is a hard line. I've kept quiet for her sake for a long time, she says. But I won't let her sacrifice my granddaughter anymore, just to keep a pretty picture on the wall. The word sticks in my chest. Sacrifice. For once it's pointed in the right direction. Do it, I say. All of it. The pushback starts within 24 hours of Nadia sending the formal meeting request. First, it's my Aunt Monica, my mother's sister, calling from a number I haven't seen in months. Lily, she says after the barest greeting, what are you doing? I stare at the ceiling in my apartment. I'm asking why my parents used my inheritance to build their life and Grace's, and left me scraping by, I say. I'm asking for answers. You're threatening to tear this family apart, she shoots back. Your parents have worked so hard. We've all sacrificed so much. And now, right when your father is finally making a difference in this community, you decide to air dirty laundry. Dirty laundry, I repeat. They stole my future. Don't use words like stole, she says, voice going cold. It's dramatic. They were managing things. You've always been sensitive. You don't see the big picture. Think about your mother's health. This stress could be terrible for her. There it is. The guilt, the idea that my existence as a problem threatens everyone else's peace. I end the call before she can say more. The next day, Mrs. Hargrove corners me in the church parking lot. She smells like floral perfume and righteousness. I've heard some troubling things, she says. About you, making accusations. Good daughters forgive quietly, Lily. They don't drag their parents through the mud. Good parents don't drain their child's trust fund, I say. My voice trembles, but I don't look away. They don't erase one daughter to build up another. Her eyes widen as if I've cursed in God's driveway. You should be careful how you talk, she says. People are starting to wonder if you're not yourself. The phrase sticks in my head long after she walks away. Not yourself. Sensitive. Dramatic. A pattern emerges. It crystallizes when Monica calls again at night, voice hushed, like we're conspirators instead of combatants. They're worried about you, she says. Your parents. They've mentioned that you've always had episodes, mood swings. You get fixated. I'm just saying, if this goes to lawyers, people might bring that up. You don't want the town to think you're unbalanced. Heat rushes through me so fast I feel dizzy. Unbalanced, I repeat. They're telling people I'm mentally unstable. They're concerned, she corrects. You don't want to threaten your own credibility. You could hurt yourself more than you hurt them. When I hang up, my hands are shaking with anger so sharp it makes my eyes sting. It hits me. They're not just preparing to fight me on the facts. They're planning to erase me in a new way, to paint me as crazy, so no one has to believe the girl they robbed. They ambushed me on the highway by leaving me alone. They ambushed me last night with years of hidden decisions. Now they're planning to ambush my character. No, I say out loud in my empty living room. Not this time. I start saving everything. Every text from my parents telling me I'm overreacting. Every voicemail with a guilt trip. Screenshots of Aunt Monica's messages. Old emails where my mother bragged about how independent I am, how they don't have to worry about me financially. I spread it all out on the dining table. Maya comes home and stops in the doorway, eyes widening at the mess of paper and sticky notes. Looks like a crime drama in here, she says. It is, I say. The long, boring kind where the criminals wear suits and go to church. She rolls up her sleeves. Then let's build the board. We spend hours sorting. Trust statements in one pile, community center press releases in another, my parents' social media posts in a third. We draw lines with colored string, connect dates to events. The night my car died on the highway matched to a chunky home renovation withdrawal. The month they told me they couldn't help with the boot camp deposit matched to a community contribution photo op. Every no I got paired with a yes they gave themselves using my name. By the time we're done, my life looks like evidence, and for the first time, that feels right. A few days later, as I'm pinning another note about my father's campaign launch to the board, my phone buzzes with a number I now recognize. Lily Nadia says when I answer, they've agreed to the meeting. My pulse jumps. Conditions. Your father is bringing his own lawyer, she says. They insisted the full community center board be present. They think having the board there on their turf will put pressure on you to back down. They're expecting to control the room. The familiar feeling rises in my chest, that sense of walking into a space where everyone else already knows their lines, and mine is to stay quiet. For a second, old fear whispers that I should cancel, sign something, disappear. Then I look at the board on my wall, at the web of dates and dollar signs and smiling photos built on my erased future. I remember Mr. Alvarez saying, "Forgiveness without truth is just silence." Let them bring whoever they want, I say. They've ambushed me my whole life. This time I walk in ready. The Wright Family Community Center looks different when you know your name helped pay for the bricks. The lobby walls are lined with photos of my parents holding shovels, cutting ribbons, hugging kids whose parents call them saints. My father's campaign flyers sit in a tidy stack by the brochures full of words like integrity and family. Nadia and I walk past all of it to the boardroom at the back. My grandmother is already there, seated at one end of the long, polished table. On the walls, framed newspaper clippings celebrate donations and awards. I recognize one headline, Right Sacrifice for Community. I want to tear it down. On the far side of the table, my parents sit with their lawyer, a gray-haired man with an expensive tie and a calm, practiced face. Grace is beside them, hands folded tightly in her lap. 3 board members sit along the wall, looking nervous. At the corner, leaning against a cabinet with a notebook in hand, is a man I've only ever seen in print, Everett Lane from the Gazette. My father notices him and stiffens. I thought this was a private meeting, he says. I invited him, Grandma says coolly. As a witness. He's here off the record, unless I say otherwise. Everett nods. I'm here to observe, he says. What I do with what I hear depends on choices made in this room. My mother's smile is tight. This is highly irregular, she says, dragging outsiders into a family conversation. This stopped being just a family issue when you started using my trust fund to buy a public halo, I say. My voice comes out steady, surprising even me. Nadia sets a neat stack of folders in front of her. Let's get started, she says. My parents' lawyer clears his throat. On behalf of Tom and Diane Wright, he begins, I'd like to state that this is all a misunderstanding rooted in confusion about financial management. The funds in question were family-managed resources. My clients have always acted with the best interest of the family in mind. They're pillars of this community known for their generosity. It pains them to see their own daughters so misinformed. He glances at me, measured and dismissive. We're prepared to offer a goodwill payment to Lily to clear up any hurt feelings and move forward. Hurt feelings. As if this is about a rude comment at Thanksgiving instead of 8 years of theft. My mother dabs at the corner of her eye with a monogrammed tissue. We sacrificed so much to build stability for our girls, she says, voice trembling. To give them what we never had. It breaks my heart that Lily doesn't see that. That she's willing to threaten everything we've worked for. The community center, your campaign, our family. She looks at the board members, not at me. My father nods along. We used what we had to support Grace's education to keep this center running to help this town, he says. Any reasonable person can see that. We assumed Lily understood that the family comes first. We never imagined she would take this route. Nadia doesn't bother hiding her impatience. Let's be clear, she says. This isn't about hurt feelings or misunderstandings. This is about a trust fund with a single beneficiary, Lily Wright, being drained over years to pay for your personal expenses, your other daughter's education, and the public projects you've used to build your reputation. She taps the folders. Everyone in this room is going to see exactly what you did line by line. She slides copies to the board members, to my parents' lawyer, to Everett. The room goes quiet except for the rustle of paper. Mortgage payments, Nadia narrates. Renovations, club dues, lake cabin, tuition for Grace, vehicle purchase for Grace, direct transfers to the community center, all drawn from an account labeled the Lily Wright Trust, established by Evelyn and her late husband for Lily's future. Your signatures as trustees are on every foundational document. My parents' lawyer skims a page, his composure slipping for a second. We maintain that they had discretion as trustees to manage the assets, he says. But there's less conviction now. Discretion to benefit themselves and a different daughter while Lily was stranded on the side of the highway with a dead car and no money for a tow, Nadia asks. She glances at me. Lily, tell them. I look straight at my parents. 2 years ago my car died in a storm, I say. I called you from the shoulder. I told you I was scared. I asked for help paying the tow. Mom, you said it wouldn't be fair to Grace. You told me to figure it out. My mother's lips press into a thin line. I keep going. A year after that, I got into a boot camp that would have changed my career. I showed you the stats, the job placement rates. I asked for help with a small deposit. You told me you couldn't risk the family's finances on me. A week later, you posted a photo from a gala bragging about a donation from the Wright family to this center. I gesture at the wall. My name was on that check, not as a donor, as a source. One of the board members shifts in his chair looking queasy. Everett's pen moves quickly across his notebook. My father's lawyer starts to speak, but Nadia cuts him off. This isn't about whether the community center does good work, she says. It's about the fact that you built this place and your public image using money you were legally and morally obligated to protect for your eldest daughter. You let her live in poverty while you spent her future on your comfort and Grace's education. All eyes slide to Grace. She flinches. I didn't know it was like that, she says quickly. I thought it was a family fund, that Grandpa set it up for both of us, that Mom and Dad were just managing it. Is that what they told you, Nadia asks? Or is that what you chose to hear? She flips to another page. Because this email says something different. Nadia pulls out a printed email and passes copies down the table. One lands in front of Grace, another in front of my parents. My stomach twists as I recognize Grace's writing. To Mom, are you sure about the last semester payment? It's a lot. Maybe I should take a loan. Underneath my mother's reply. Don't worry about it. We'll cover it from Lily's fund. She'll never use it. She likes being independent. I remember the day Grace called to say Mom and Dad had decided to pay for her final semester so she wouldn't graduate with loans. I congratulated her. Then I went back to a double shift at the hospital. Now I know where the money came from. Grace stares at the printed email like it might disappear if she looks long enough. I didn't think, she says. I didn't understand what that meant. I meet her eyes. You understood enough to ask if you should take out a loan, I say quietly. You understood that someone was paying so you didn't have to. You just didn't want to think too hard about who it was. She flinches like I slapped her. That's enough, my mother snaps. You won't talk to your sister like that. She worked hard. She earned, so did I. I cut in. The difference is, Grace had my money under her feet every time she took a step forward. I had nothing. Silence falls heavy. Nadia lets it sit, then slides another set of documents toward my parents and their lawyer. Here's where we are, she says. This is a settlement agreement. It transfers control of all remaining assets from the trust to Lily immediately. It requires you to liquidate certain personal assets to repay as much of the misused funds as possible. It stipulates that you resign from all leadership roles at this center and any affiliated boards effective today. It also acknowledges your breach of fiduciary duty in writing. She pauses, then adds, in return, Lily agrees not to pursue criminal charges. We keep this for now in civil territory. My father's lawyer flips through the pages, his face growing more drawn. This is extreme, he says. My clients have done tremendous good for this town. Public scandal would hurt far more people than it helps. Surely we can find a quieter solution. The quieter solution was 8 years ago, Nadia says. When they could have told Lily the truth and made it right. They chose this instead. We're just describing what happened and assigning consequences. Grandma leans forward. Her voice when she speaks is calm and icy. If you don't sign this, she says to my parents, I will personally meet with every major donor, every board member, every church elder, and I will tell them exactly how you funded your generosity. I will walk Everett down to his office and give him every document I have. I will not watch you stand on my granddaughter's stolen future one day longer. All eyes turn to Everett. He lifts his hand slightly. For the record, he says, I'm here off the clock. I would love not to have to write this story. Really. But if you choose not to fix this in a meaningful way, I won't have much of a choice. The public tends to care when money meant for a child's future gets rerouted to country club dues and campaign ads. My father's composure cracks. Evelyn, please, he says, voice raw. Think about what this will do. We'll lose the house, the cabin, my campaign. You were willing to lose your daughter, she says. The rest is furniture. My mother looks at me finally, not the lawyer, not the board. Her eyes are wet, but behind the tears something hard calculates the odds. If you go through with this, she says, you're destroying your own family, your sister, your father's work, everything we built. Is that really what you want, Lily? Is this your idea of justice? I take a breath. My heart is pounding, but the fear that used to choke me in front of her is gone. You destroyed our family when you decided my future was disposable, I say. This is me refusing to let you erase me again. The pen lies in front of my father, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. For a long moment, no one moves. Then he reaches out, fingers trembling, and picks it up. My father stares at the pen like it's a live wire. For a second, I think he'll put it down, flip the table, deny everything. Instead, he lowers the tip to the page and signs his name in tight, jerky strokes. The sound of the nib scratching paper is louder than it should be. My mother's face crumples. She hesitates, then snatches the pen and scribbles her signature beside his, pressing so hard the paper dents. Nadia gathers the signed documents calmly, like she does this every day. For the record, she says these signatures transfer control of all remaining trust assets into Lily's name, effective immediately. They also acknowledge your breach of fiduciary duty and confirm your resignations from all leadership roles at this center and related boards. The public statement will go out by the end of the week. One of the board members clears his throat. The board accepts your resignations, he says, voice unsteady. We'll appoint an interim director and treasurer until we can vote on replacements. The center's work will continue. The words land like a verdict. My mother opens her mouth to protest, but my father touches her arm. He looks like someone pulled the air out of him. Let's go, Diane, he mutters. They stand unsteady. My mother glares at me, eyes bright with fury and something like disbelief that I didn't back down. After everything we've done, she whispers, you will regret this. I meet her gaze. I already regret the decade I spent believing you were on my side, I say. This is me making sure the next decade is different. She flinches as if the words hit her. They leave without saying goodbye to Grace, who still sits frozen in her chair. Everett shuts his notebook and slips it into his bag. For now, he says quietly, this stays with me. If the statement they issue is honest enough and they follow through, I don't have a story the town needs to read. Yet. He looks at me. If that changes, you have my number. Then he nods to my grandmother and walks out. Grace finally exhales a long, shaky breath. I don't even know what just happened, she says. You just watched them face a fraction of what they put me through for years, I say. My voice is tired more than angry. That's what happened. She looks like she wants to argue, then thinks better of it. I need time, she says, standing. I need to figure out what any of this means. So do I say. She leaves without hugging me. I don't chase her. The story about my parents doesn't explode all at once, it leaks. The official statement goes out 3 days later. Due to recent revelations of financial mismanagement, Tom and Diane Wright are stepping down from their leadership roles at the Wright Family Community Center to focus on addressing these issues privately. No mention of me. No mention of the word theft. But people in a town like ours can read between lines. Donors start asking questions. Volunteers whisper in hallways. My father suspends his campaign for personal reasons. A week later, his signs quietly disappear from lawns. At the grocery store, some people look at me and look away, their faces tight with judgment. Others stop me in the cereal aisle, voice low. I don't know all the details, a neighbor says, pressing a hand to my arm. But I know you. And I know something must have been very wrong for you to push this far. If you need anything, we're next door. 2 days after that, someone leaves a casserole on my doorstep with no note, just my name on the foil. Looks like you have actual community now, Maya says, setting it on the counter. Not just the kind your parents pay for. I lean against the cabinets, exhaustion settling into my bones. It doesn't feel like winning, I say. It feels like ripping out a rotten tooth. Necessary, but it still hurts. You didn't do this to them, she says. They did. You just stopped letting them hide it. My parents start texting more often once the reality hits. Long messages from my mother about how she can't sleep, how her friends don't look at her the same way at church, how her health is spiraling because of the stress I created. My father sends short, stilted notes about practical matters, asking if I've spoken to certain accountants, whether I'll consider issuing a statement to help them save face. I read them. I don't respond. It's not revenge, it's survival. One evening, weeks after the meeting, there's a knock at my new front door. The rental house is small but solid, a step up from the apartment I almost lost twice. I open the door to find Grace on the porch, hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a plain sweater instead of the polished outfits she used to post online. She looks older, or maybe just less protected. "Can I come in?" she asks. I step aside. She wanders into the living room, taking in the mismatched furniture, the half-finished gallery wall of thrift store frames, and photos of people who have shown up for me. "Nice place," she says. "Cozy." "It's mine," I say. "The rent is in my name, the bills too." She winces. "I deserved that." She sinks onto the couch, hands twisting in her lap. "I wanted to tell you something," she says. "Something I should have told you years ago." My stomach tightens. "Okay." She stares at the coffee table. "I was 16, she starts. "I woke up one night to get water and heard Mom and Dad arguing in the office. Mom was saying the paperwork was too complicated, the trust, the community center, the campaign accounts. Dad said something like, if we could just rewrite it and erase Lily, it would be so much simpler. The word hits me like a punch I saw coming and still couldn't dodge. Erase. He actually said that, I ask. Erase. She nods, eyes shiny. Mom told him not to say it out loud, that Grandma would never forgive them. But they were talking like your name on that account was an obstacle, something they had to work around. She laughs weakly, a sound with no humor in it. And I just stood there in the hallway listening and did nothing. I went back to bed and pretended I didn't hear it. Anger flares hot and sharp. "Why are you telling me this now?" I ask. "Because everything fell apart, and now you feel bad. Because I should have told you then," she says, voice cracking. "I should have asked what they meant. I should have told Grandma. But my life was easy, and I was scared if I poked at anything, it would stop being easy. I liked having my tuition paid, my car, my apartment. I liked being the good daughter. So I let them sacrifice you for me." Tears spill over. "I'm sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just couldn't keep letting you think it was ignorance. It wasn't. It was cowardice." I sit back, breathing through the urge to scream, to tell her she doesn't get to hand me this truth like a confession that cancels a decade. "I'm glad you finally said it," I manage. "I'm glad you're not letting them rewrite the story anymore." But an apology doesn't put my 20s back. It doesn't refund the nights I went without medication because I couldn't afford it while you drove my money to class. She wipes her face with her sleeve. "I know," she whispers. "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I know what I did. That I'm done pretending I didn't." The anger drains out, leaving a heavy, sad clarity. "If you want any relationship with me going forward," I say slowly, "it starts with you building your life without my money and without their lies. No more pretending the cost wasn't there. No more letting them erase me to keep yourself comfortable." She nods, swallowing hard. "I got a job," she says. "A real one. Not glamorous. Legal assistant at a small firm. I'm paying my own rent. Mom and Dad offered to cover my loans and I said no. There's something almost like pride in that, and for a moment I see the sister she could be if she wasn't standing on my shadow. That's a start," I say. "It doesn't fix anything yet, but it matters." She stands, wiping at her eyes. "I'll let you get back to your life," she says. I hope someday maybe there's a version of this where we can talk without all of this between us." "Maybe," I say. "I don't promise." When she leaves, I feel a strange mix of grief and relief. The last piece of the story is in place now. They didn't just misuse my trust in secret. They talked about erasing me like I was a line item. And my sister, who benefited from that erasure, finally said it out loud. My parents' perfect world keeps shrinking. Word of their mismanagement spreads. Some donors quietly redirect their giving. My father's campaign treasurer resigns, citing ethical concerns. My mother loses her place on the regional nonprofit board she bragged about for years. They still text, still try to pull me back into their narrative with messages about how hard all this has been on them. I still don't respond. Instead, I make an appointment with a financial planner. Sitting across from her in a modest office above a strip mall, I slide over the latest account statement. The trust is not what it should have been, but it's more than I've ever had. First priority, she says, clicking her pen, is stability. We clear the highest interest debt. We build savings. We set boundaries around what you will and won't spend this on. I nod. There's also the question of the community center funds, I say. Some of the money that built it was mine, but it actually helps people. I don't want to punish kids in after-school programs for what my parents did. She smiles faintly. Then we get creative, she says. We can restructure some of the designated funds under your oversight, make sure they're used transparently. You can insist on audits, governance changes. You don't have to burn it down to make it honest. When I leave her office, the sun is low over the parking lot. As I step onto the sidewalk, a familiar voice calls my name. Everett leans against his car, hands in his pockets. Didn't mean to ambush you, he says. Evelyn mentioned you might be here today. I can't help a small, wry smile. Seems like ambush has been the theme of my life anyway, I say. What's up? He studies me for a moment. I've been thinking about your situation, he says. Not just as a local scandal that almost was, but as part of a bigger pattern. Families using one child's resources to prop up an image to fund everyone else's comfort. The way we idolize people for their sacrifices without asking who they're really sacrificing. He pauses. There's a story there. Not a hit piece on your parents. A story about survival. About what happens when the kid they tried to erase decides to fight back and still chooses not to burn it all down. If you ever want to tell it with your voice on your terms, I'd like to listen. The idea makes my stomach twist and my chest expand at the same time. To take what they did to me and turn it into something that might help someone else see their own situation clearly. To speak out in a way that isn't just about revenge, but about warning and solidarity. I look past him at the skyline of our town, at the church steeple, the water tower, the silhouette of the community center roofline. All the places where my parents' version of the truth used to sit unchallenged. I'm not ready today, I say, but maybe someday. Everett nods. When you are, he says, you know where to find me. As he drives away, I feel it settling around me. Not triumph exactly, but something steadier. I didn't erase them, tempting as it would have been. I didn't torch the center that actually helps people. I aimed as precisely as I could at what needed to break their power to define me, their ability to spend my life without my consent. This is my version of revenge. Controlled. Accountable. Mine. A year after the meeting at the community center, I'm sitting on the front porch of a house with my name on the deed. It's not big, not fancy. 2 bedrooms, a patch of grass, peeling white paint. I plan to fix this spring. It's mine. No one sacrificed me to get these walls. No one can threaten to take them if I stop playing along. Inside, the living room still smells faintly of new furniture and cardboard. The worst of my debts are gone now, swallowed slowly and deliberately as I paid them off. The trust, what was left of it, didn't magically fix everything, but with a good financial planner and a lot of discipline, it gave me something I've never had before: a cushion. A choice. The old panic is still there sometimes when I open my banking app, like I'm about to be ambushed by another overdraft notice. But more often now, I see numbers that mean stability instead of survival. The spare bedroom is an office, not a roommate space. There's a proper desk, an ergonomic chair, a big monitor that doesn't flicker when I open too many tabs. A hand-lettered sign on the wall reads, Right Way Studio. It started as a joke, my last name, their wrong choices, But it stuck. I build websites now as my main job, not just as side hustles to keep the lights on. I partner with local nonprofits, small shops, women starting businesses out of their kitchens, people who can't afford a big agency but still deserve work that makes them look like they belong at the table. On Saturdays, that office becomes a classroom. I clear the desks, set up folding chairs, and host free workshops on basic budgeting and digital skills. The first time I advertised it, I worried no one would come. The room filled up. A single mom who'd been ambushed by medical bills, a 20-year-old trying to escape a paycheck-to-paycheck job, a retired mechanic learning to sell custom woodwork online. I show them how to read interest rates, how to spot predatory clauses, how to make their first simple web page. I tell them without names that I learned some of this the hard way by watching people I trusted use money as a weapon. We sit around the worn rug sharing coffee and stories. It feels like the kind of community my parents liked to pose with, but never really lived inside. Maya is still my anchor. She moved into a place a few blocks away, but we see each other so often it feels like we share a backyard. Sometimes she sprawls on my porch with her own laptop, while I work inside, yelling suggestions about color schemes through the screen door. On Sundays, she comes with me to Grandma Evelyn's house for dinner. Those meals are quieter than the ones at my parents' ever were. No speeches, no humble bragging about sacrifices. Just roast chicken vegetables from Evelyn's garden and questions that actually wait for answers. She never says I told you so. She doesn't need to. Her presence is enough. Grace and I talk sometimes, not like we're best friends or roommates or any of the versions of sisterhood I used to dream about when I was alone in our shared bedroom as kids. More like two people who survived the same storm in different boats and are now comparing maps. She's still working as a legal assistant. She lives in a small apartment she pays for herself. She complains about rent and office politics and the grind of starting at the bottom, and there's a strange relief in knowing we're finally on the same side of the ledger, doing our own work, paying our own way. Every so often she'll text me something small, passed a certification exam, paid off my smallest loan, got a raise. It's never followed by a request for money. That matters more than I thought it would. Trust is slow. Some days I'm still angry at her for staying quiet all those years. Other days I see the kid in the hallway hearing our father talk about erasing me and deciding silence was safer. We're building something new, fragile and honest. It may never look like the sisters in those holiday commercials, but it's real. I'll take real over perfect now. As for my parents, the silence between us is almost complete. Occasionally my phone buzzes with a holiday message, a photo of a smaller house in a less polished neighborhood, a line or two about how things have been so hard for us. I read them the way you read headlines about strangers. I don't reply. Not out of spite, but because I've finally learned that contact is not the same as love, and forgiveness is not the same as reopening the door. They made their choices. I'm making mine. Twice a month I drive across town to a small office where a brass plate by the door reads, Dr. Priya Sharma Counseling. At first I walked in braced for judgment, like she might tell me I'd gone too far or not far enough. Instead, she asked me what it felt like to realize my family had treated me like a resource instead of a person. We talked about grief, not for the house or the money or the lost boot camp, but for the parents I thought I had and never really did. She drew a line on a piece of paper and wrote forgiveness on one end and contact on the other. People act like you can't have one without the other, she said. But you can forgive someone in your heart and still decide they don't get access to you. Or you can have contact without forgiveness, which is what you were doing before performing family without safety. I'm not sure I've forgiven them yet. Some days I feel close. Other days I remember my mother's voice saying, she'll never use it. She likes being independent, and the anger flares hot and new. But I have stopped letting them threaten my sense of worth. I have stopped measuring myself against the story they told about me. They tried to erase me on paper to make my name a line item they could move around to make their lives easier. All they really did was give me one hell of a first chapter. The rest of the story is mine to write. On a shelf in my office sits a podcast mic I bought with my first big client payment. Next to it is a small camera. I told myself I got them just in case, but the truth is, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Once a week now, I sit at my desk, hit record, and tell a story. Sometimes it's mine, anonymized details shifted just enough to protect people who don't deserve the internet's rage, even if they deserve mine. Sometimes it's someone else's, a teacher whose brother drained their joint account, a son whose parents used his identity to open credit cards, a woman whose husband erased her name from the business she built together. I call the channel Erased and Found. It's my Mr. Balance-style corner of the internet for family betrayal and survival. I don't sensationalize. I don't have to. Real life is dramatic enough. At the end of each episode, I say some version of the same thing. Family isn't the people who can hurt you the most and get away with it. Family is who shows up when the lies fall apart, who looks at you when the dust settles and refuses to let anyone erase you, including yourself. People write in from other towns, other states, sending stories of their own. Small apartments, big houses, farms, suburbs, cities. The details change, the core doesn't. Over and over, I hear about one child sacrificed so the others can shine, one person gaslit into believing they're crazy for seeing what's right in front of them. I can't fix their lives, but I can tell them they're not alone. That matters too. Tonight, the sun sinks behind the trees, washing my little street in orange. I'm on the porch with my laptop editing a new episode. The title draft at the top of the file reads, "They called it sacrifice. I called it theft." I pause the audio when my phone buzzes. A new email from a local bakery looking for a website refresh. A text from Grace lands right after. Got the job, full paralegal position. On my own this time. For a moment, I just stare at the 3 words at the end. On my own. She doesn't mention our parents. She doesn't mention money. She just shares a win she earned herself. I feel a small, quiet warmth unfurl in my chest. I type back, "Congratulations, you earned it. That's all. It's enough." I close the laptop and lean back, watching the sky deepen. The air smells like cut grass and someone's barbecue down the street. Somewhere in this town, my parents are telling a much smaller story about themselves now. They don't get to write mine anymore. They sacrificed me to build their version of the perfect family, I say softly into the evening, testing the words out loud. But I survived. I walked away. And I built something better. I think of my studio, my students, my grandmother's table, Maya's laugh, the stranger who will hear one of my episodes and finally realize they're not crazy, just betrayed. They don't get to erase me, I add. They don't get to write my story anymore. I do. The porch light flickers on. Inside, my phone buzzes with another client inquiry, another small step into a future I chose. For once, the story ahead of me feels open, not like an ambush, but like a road. Mine to walk, mine to leave, mine to change whenever I need to. As Lily's chapter closes tonight, the narrator lets the weight of her choices settle and quietly steps back from her world. If this drama family story of betrayal, sacrifice, and freedom moved you, let us know. Like the video, subscribe for more revenge stories, and share your own experiences in the comments. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Hour. We'll see you next time.